Welcome to the YUFE Academy Lectures 2021-2022, organized by the University of Rome Vergata on the thematic area European Identity. I'm Luisa Corrado, Scientific Coordinator of the Young Universities for the Future of Europe project at the University of Rome Vergata. These Academy Lectures are part of a series of activities that are going to disseminate our project to academics and citizens. YUFE, as you might be aware, aims at creating an open and inclusive university across several European countries where academia is important, but also connected with business, government, and the society. In October, we had already 2 lectures organized in the thematic area of citizen well-being. It was open both to academics and citizens, and it was a successful event. We actually hope to replicate the success today with Professor Papa. Today's event is going to be extremely challenging and interesting for our audience. We should be particularly grateful to Professor Buratti from the Faculty of Law, Dr. Di Giandomenico and Dr. Brizzi and other colleagues in the YUFE project for supporting us in organizing the event. I'm leaving now the floor to Professor Buratti, who will present our speaker, Professor Massimo Papa.
Thank you very much, Luisa. Welcome to you all. I'm glad to host this YUFE academic lecture within the activities of the Department of Law and with the participation of the Global Governance Program. I am delighted to introduce our key speaker, Professor Massimo Papa, who is a friend, a mentor, although a very young mentor, and an outstanding scholar of comparative law. As many already know, his main research fields are Arab and Muslim law and institutions. Massimo speaks fluently many languages of that area of the world and has a long-standing experience in those countries. As a specialist of Arab and Muslim world, Massimo has often contributed to the endless debate on multiculturalism in the European landscape. In our frequent dialogues on European identity, we have always agreed on the fact that a European identity can be shaped only within a multicultural approach, open to pluralism of values, customs, religions, races. The legal perspective is crucial for preparing such a multicultural identity. On the one side, it's up to law and policies to regulate integration of groups in a multicultural society. On the other hand, law is requested to adjudicate litigations related to multicultural clashes, which are very telling to understand the challenges of a multicultural society and can lead to the achievement of the goal of a European multicultural identity. I remind myself that while creating an even closer union among the peoples of Europe, the same treaty of the European Union affirms our union is based on the values of respect of minorities, pluralism, and tolerance and non-discrimination. Our lecture takes place in a dramatic context of war at the door of the European Union, a war which touches the skin and the heart of European peoples. In such a context, it is perfectly understandable that a reaction takes place characterized by reinforcement of European core values of Western liberal democratic identity. It is important not to forget, however, that openness to pluralism and solidarity is exactly the core value of a European identity. The lecture is recorded. Professor Papa will speak for about 45 minutes. There will be question and answers section for around 30 minutes. You can both ask questions through the chat. We will read your written questions, or raise your virtual hand and we will try to take live questions if the time is compatible. We are expected to end the event at 4:15 p.m. Massimo, thank you again for accepting our invitation, and I leave you the floor.
Thank you, Andrea. I'm really honored to be here with you this afternoon, and good afternoon, everybody, by the way. Thank you to you, Andrea, thank you to Luisa, and to our colleagues. We are friends, after all, despite we are colleagues. I would like to start from your last point, because we can't keep silent in front of this tragedy, which is the war in the heart of Europe. Even if Russia takes out some sort of operational win in Ukraine, in the sense of capturing territory or coercing concessions, its victory will almost certainly be a Pyrrhic one. This will be true not only for Russia, but also for Europe itself. The outcome of the war in Ukraine is anything but certain. And yet, one thing is clear, according to me. The war in Ukraine will be a watershed historical event for Europe. For macro levels, trends in particular are upending the strategic balance in Europe. Russia will perhaps likely emerge weaker, but perhaps no less dangerous. The coming back of ideologies, it's a new fact Europe has to face with. By contrast, Europe will likely become stronger militarily, perhaps, less energy dependent, and more unified against, I would stress and underline this point, would appear more unified against somebody else, in this case, Russia. Is that what we want? In front of the war, any war, reason seems to surround her in the face of unreasonable and lays down its arms. Terentius, the Latin poet, was writing, "I am a man, and nothing of what is human is extraneous to me. But what does push people to see other people as enemies?" Well, the crisis profoundly questions Europe about its role, its identity, and its future. To tell you the truth, after this flood, the heart of the continent, the world, Europe will be not the same. It will be here enough to recall, as a sort of nutshell, that we must return to reflect on the incompleteness of the design of political union and rediscover the dream, the visionary nature of that project, as well as the full self-understanding of the historical, anthropological, cultural, as well as legal identity of Europe. Then it requires us to question the Dublin system, for example, since it is urgent for states such as Poland and Hungary to definitely set aside the hypocrisies put in place by themselves on the issue of migration flows in face of the eruption of hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian refugees at their border. And last but not least, given the consequences that the war will have on the European economies, the crisis calls into question the lack of union in the specific area of energy policies. And of course, the readjustment at both geopolitical and cultural level, starting in the Mediterranean area. Well, in his speech on the status of the Union, addressed just 5 years ago, the President of the European Commission marked out that Europe had the winds in favor, and therefore enjoyed an opportunity that, however, would not remain open forever. He invited people and governments to make the most of that momentum and capture the wind in our sails, with the aim of both maintaining the course the set course, and to set the course for the future. Well, no doubt that the wind has changed since then. Brexit has made it emblematically manifest to us, which has certainly not helped to strengthen the image of the Union in front of the world. And yet the conclusion of that speech, with Mark Twain's quotation made there, deserves to be recalled. In a few years, we will not be disappointed with the things we have done, but with those we have not done. And I add, for ourselves and for the future of our children. Here, precisely, in this dramatic moment in the European history and the humanitarian crisis, it's necessary to show, as Andrea was saying, solidarity, respect for human rights, founding values of European identity, the ability to promote peace. And then we could discuss the option of issuing Eurobonds for purchasing weapons and to strengthen a European army, or to set up a European army after all. The priority of forming this European army according to the imperishable Latin maxim, si pacem vis para bellum. If you want peace, then prepare the war. But generating a future of hope and peaceful coexistence on the continent, it is a must. History requires us to do so. And we Europeans will be ready for the challenge if we know how to look at our deepest and most authentic cultural identity. And one way of shedding light on the cultural identity of Europe is to search for a central concept, a heart of Europe, which would simultaneously be both its source and summary. The vision of Paul Valéry, French poet and essayist. Paul Valéry, in his essay, L'Européen, the European, wrote in 1924. I translate myself from French, more or less, the meaning of this Paul Valéry sentence. Wherever the names of Caesar, Gaius, Trajan, and Virgil, wherever the names of Moses and St. Paul, wherever the names of Aristotle, Plato, and Euclid have a significance and carry weight, that is where Europe is. So Valéry insists on the spiritual character of Europe by adding, it's remarkable that the people of Europe are not defined by race, nor by language or customs, but by desires and the breadth of will. Well, we can indeed image, like Valéry, the cultural identity of Europe as being a remarkable expansion of the Union, achieved under the Roman Empire, the Latin culture, of Greek thought, through Arab translation from Greek into Arabic. Please do not forget this, which is very important for what we are going to say. And Roman law, plus, of course, the Bible, and contributions from Jewish culture as well as from Islamic civilization throughout centuries of history. We are a melting pot culture. The highest and the most sophisticated forms of this multiculturalism could be represented by the example of the Arab conquest of Spain, the so-called period of Al-Andalus, or the conquest of the Arab conquest of Sicily, where so many religions coexist together, so many ethnicities, so many races, and so many languages coexist, giving form to the most sophisticated form of civilization of that time. But please, take in your mind that also Russian literature, Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, Gogol, and so on, are fundamental parts of the European cultural identity. So what I want to say, and I need to cut, contemporary Europe seems to have lost its melting pot heritage in favor of pure nationalist answer to local situations. Of course, contemporary Europe is not the same of the time of Paul Valéry. It will be enough to consider migration flows, other flows than the ones I have already mentioned, coming from all over the world, especially from Islamic world. The new world simply seems to have erased the Afghan tragedy. Nobody speaks about the Afghan situation right now. Nobody seems to take care of the Afghan refugees, of course. We are familiar with dealing with emergencies. Well, this sharply seems to challenge European identity and arises so many issues from a legal, as Andrea said, as well as from a cultural point of view. The presence of Muslims in Europe, for example, affects not only integration policies, but it's strictly related to religious freedom and security issues on the other side. Well, to enter the core of my lecture today, estimates of the number of Muslims in European Union member states vary widely, depending on the methodology and definitions used and the geographical limits imposed, of course. Well, excluding Turkey and the Balkans regions of the ancient presence, of course, of Muslim, researchers estimate that as many as 27 million Muslims live today in the EU. That is about 5% of the total EU population. Muslims are the largest religious minority in Europe, and Islam is the continent's fastest growing religion because of the rate of fertility of young Muslims living in Europe, of course. Substantial Muslim population exist, especially in Western European countries, including France, where we can count up to 6 million of Muslims, Germany, around 5 million, the United Kingdom, about 4 million, Italy, with 2 million and a half of Muslims, and then Spain, Netherlands, and Belgium, and also the Scandinavian countries. Well, Europe's Muslim population are ethnically diverse, and Muslim immigrants in Europe hail from a variety of Middle Eastern, African, and Asian countries, as well as Turkey. So most Muslim communities have their roots in Western Europe's colonial heritage and immigration policies of the 50s and the 60s used to counter labor shortages during the period of reconstruction after World War II. These policies attracted large number of North Africans, Turks, and Pakistanis. Furthermore, in recent years, there have been influxes of Muslim migrants and political refugees from other regions and countries, including the Balkans, Afghanistan, as I told you, Iraq, Syria, Libya, Somalia, and West Bank and Gaza Strip. So, Muslims are different, among themselves for historical, geographical, cultural reasons. But while European Muslims share or are affiliated with Islam as a common religious belief, or better, Islam is not a religious belief per se, but it's more rightly must be considered a modus vivendi, a way of life. So Muslim, despite these common religious belief, they are far away from forming a homogeneous or unified community with a common identity. This is due to the variety of their experiences. First of all, their personal migrant experience or their family's country of origin, generational differences, and variation in religious practices and political affiliation. So Islam, I would like to repeat, is plural per se in terms of interpretation, in terms of versions, plus personal experience. And all these things can extensively contribute to these different ways of living Islam. So one thing is the so-called official Islam, another thing is the living Islam, the daily living Islam. The proportion of Muslims who have citizenship of an EU member state varies among European countries, largely as a consequence of different naturalization regulations. The same, and then I would like to spend some few words on these bizarre mechanism of granting citizenship to people living in our countries for decades. And the same is true with regard to the degrees of legal and social integration of Muslim communities. In most EU member states, it remains a challenge still today. But apart from what I'm going to say, Muslims are often victims of a negative stereotyping at times, reinforced through negative or selective reporting in the media. In addition, they are vulnerable to manifestation of prejudice, hatred in the form of anything from verbal threats through physical attacks on people and property. Many Muslims, particularly young people, face limited opportunities for social advancement, social exclusion, and discrimination, which could give rise to openness and alienation to these young people. And research and statistical data show that Muslims are often disproportionately represented in areas with poor housing condition, while their educational achievements fall below average and their unemployment rates are higher than average. So Muslims are often employed in jobs that require qualification, and as a group, they are overrepresented in low-paying sectors of the economy. But Muslims in Europe are not only faced with a mere social integration challenges. Then I would like to open this very important bracket. Terrorist attacks in New York, September 11, then Madrid, London, and violent acts such as the murder of the Dutch filmmaker Theo van Gogh in November 2004, or the violent protests against the cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad in Denmark by radicalized Islamists, Bataclan attacks, and then attacks in Barcelona, or the one during the Christmas market in Berlin, have completely changed and distorted public perception of Muslims in Europe. These attacks reinforced perceived linkage of Islam with terror and violence, and it seems to support some of Huntington's prognosis of a clash of civilizations, or Oriana Fallaci's position in expressing la rabbia e l'orgoglio, the anger and the proud. Its annual report on 2019 activities of the European Commission against racism and intolerance, ECRI, showed how the normalization of xenophobic nationalism tend to structurally discriminate Muslims in Europe. Xenophobic nationalism frequently continues to portray Islam as a religion alien to national, cultural, and identity of many member states. Anti-Muslim rhetoric makes Muslims wearing signs of their religion far more vulnerable, while multiple discrimination worsen the situation further, notably for Muslim women wearing Islamic scarves or whatever. So the ECRI notice that discriminating laws are not only baked by ultra-nationalist parties, but they are largely shared by common opinion. Well, in this context, the temptation to identify Islam with the fundamentalism has become more pronounced. For many people in Europe, Islam has by definition become the other, an antipode to Western secular democracy. This has led to a problematic discourse of us and they, we Europeans and they Muslims, which many Muslims find stigmatizing and alienating. This discourse depends the already existing integration challenges and social rifts between Muslim migrants and their European host societies vis-a-vis their religious belief or their religious practice. Just to mention the main issues, let's simply think to the Islamic veil, l'affaire du voile, which is so central in French public debate, or the Islamic dress code in public space, conflicting with the French idea of laïcité, the complete distance from any kind of religion, with the highest European court, including constitutional courts, as well as the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg, trying to balance religious freedom and public policy, banning the integral veil, very often wrongly called burqa, which is the traditional Afghan veil, which has nothing to do with niqab or other Islamic kind of wearing. Well, and to continue, just to mention the issue of food halal in prisons or in public schools and hospitals, the issues of religious symbols, such as the presence of the cross in public classroom or in courtrooms or in prisons, some culturally oriented crimes, such as the honor killing or domestic violence against women or forced marriage or even the GFM, the genital female mutilation, which are wrongly attributed and linked to Islam. Well, all these and other aspects I would like to talk to you about, maybe later during our debate, well, shade a bad light on Islamic communities, and it seems to seriously challenge European multiculturalism, as Andrea was saying. Well, moreover, it contributes to the further withdrawal of many Muslims into segregated parallel society. There are some very renowned analysts, such as the French Olivier Roy and Francis Fukuyama, who have pointed out that the radical Islamist ideology that has motivated terror attacks over the past decades has to be seen in a larger measure as a manifestation of modern identity politics rather than of traditional Muslim culture. Well, especially young, second, third generation Muslim immigrants seems to search for new identities outside the norms of their Western host countries, and sometimes turn towards violent radicalism. The root of these radical Islamism, according to Olivier Roy, it is not of a cultural nature. That is, it is not byproduct of something inherent in Islam or the culture that is the religion has produced. Radical Islamism has emerged, according to this author, rather because Islam has become deterritorialized in a certain sense, in such a way as to throw open the whole question of Muslim identity. Identity, therefore, becomes problematic precisely when Muslims leave traditional Muslim society by, for example, emigrating to Western Europe. And here comes the role of religious authority, and I would like just to spend some few words later on. But here also comes the point of using internet and I would say cyber mufti and cyber religious authority in order to get legal advice how to behave in these Western hosting society. So just young Muslim Google and surf on internet just to get some Islamic guide, some Islamic precept, the right and the correct understanding of Islamic values in order to behave like good Muslim in European context. So one's identity as Muslim is no longer supported by the outside society. And indeed, there is a strong pressure to conform to the West prevailing cultural norms. The question of authenticity arises in a way that it never did in the traditional society, since a gap develops between one's inner identity as a Muslim and one's behavior vis-a-vis the surrounding society. And then radical Islamism and jihadism, like the extreme form, can arise in response to the resulting quest for identity. These ideologies can provide answers to the question, who am I? Posed by young Muslim in Holland or France. You are a member of the global Ummah, like the Islamic community, defined by adherence to the universal Islamic doctrine. Muslim identity thus becomes a matter of inner belief rather than outward conformity to social practice. Roa points out that these constitute the Protestantization of Muslim belief, where salvation lies in a subjective state that includes one outward behavior. Understanding radical Islamism as a form of identity politics also explain why second and third generation European Muslims have turned to it. First generation immigrants have usually not made a psychological break with the culture of their land of birth and carry traditional practices with them to their new homes. Their children, by contrast, going to school and having so many Western friends are often conscious of their parents' religiosity, and yet have not become integrated into the culture of the new society. They are something in the middle, in between, stuck between two cultures with which they cannot identify. They find a strong appeal to the universalist ideology of contemporary jihadism. This is a great risk. Whatever there is anything specific to the Muslim religion that encourages this radicalization, I must be clear on this point, remains an open question from this point of view, according to the different instrumentalized interpretation. And several analysts suggest that the mainstreaming Muslim into European society would not necessarily translate into an embrace of liberal values, the one Andrea was mentioning. And some even question whether Islam itself is compatible with what they call European political principles and values. Well, other academics argue that Muslim communities must be more vocal against extremists and actively counter rather than tolerate radical preachers. And advocates of a modern Westernized Islam, such as Navid Kermani, have rejected this idea that democracy in Islam cannot be reconciled, arguing that the Quran is neither a manifest nor a pamphlet against modernism and democracy, and that nobody will seriously claim that believing Muslims cannot take part in Europe because of believing in the unicity of God, Tawhid, or Muhammad as the last prophet, Nawaba, the prophet of the mission of the Prophet Muhammad, judgment at doomsday, or turn 5 times daily to Mecca to pray. At least Sunni, she can pray 3 times a day, or fast 1 month in the year during the Ramadan period, which is just going to start, and pay poverty tax, zakat. and would like to travel to Mecca once in their lives to perform their pilgrimage, their Hajj. Well, some analysts say that the increase of jihadist websites and the internet chat rooms has resulted in extremism appealing to ever younger Muslims. Think about foreign fighters and the attraction of these young people to the territory conquered by Daesh, by ISIS, and so foreign fighters stressing on social frontiers against Muslims in Western society. But immigration policies in European countries, as I told you, have traditionally been very diverse, and European harmonization has proved complex. An active integration policy has for a long time been neglected, while some European countries have in the past considered immigration as a temporary phenomenon and labeled immigrants as guest workers. This was the German approach. Other European countries, such as Great Britain and Netherlands, have had political majority who embraced the notion of becoming multicultural society and encouraged the creation of ethnic mosaic, including some Islamic enclaves. There are some no-go zones in some British cities where even Scotland Yard or British police cannot enter. And there are at the entry some Islamic symbols forbidding drinking alcohol or recommending an Islamic dress code, for example. So there are also the very well-known British, sort of arbitration courts, which can deal with family issues and personal status issues, and settling disputes among Muslim community. So it is a sort of a small little state within the state, like a sort of a Islamic enclaves, as I told you. But this is the British solution. This concept of integration, which allows immigrants to preserve their identity and diversity, whilst not being asked to adjust and embrace the values of their host country, has been strongly criticized for having been too oriented on group recognition and group rights, and for having ceded too much authority cultural communities to find rules of behavior for their own members rather than insisting on individual integration. France, the country with the biggest Muslim population in Europe, has adopted an integration policy which is aimed at turning Muslim immigrants into citoyens français. So despite the fact that the French assimilationist approach has been hailed as a precedent for creating national identity, not based on ethnicity or religion, in the name of French laicité, as opposed to corporatist islands like Germany, which find it awkward to discuss national identity, most EU member states continue to struggle to better integrate their growing Muslim populations. The social and security challenges which European countries face in this field remain very similar. The response, which has been developed by EU governments, is twofold. First, stepping up repressive security measures, and second, developing state dialogue with Muslims in order to prevent radicalization by encouraging moderate westernized Islam. But since September 11, European governments have sought to contain Islamic extremism and counter jihadist terrorism, primarily by tightening security measures and reforming immigration and asylum laws. In many EU states, its legislation has been amended in order to allow authorities to investigate religious groups and facilitate the expulsion of Islamist radicals. So religious freedom in a certain sense have been largely restricted. The security services have reportedly also increased their monitoring of mosques and other meeting places. Also notable are EU efforts to boost police and judicial cooperation by introducing a European arrest warrant, a European Attorney General, enhancing intelligence sharing and strengthening external EU border controls. Well, whilst these anti-terrorist measures have been taken at national and EU level, there is growing awareness throughout EU member states that the problem of Muslim extremism and radicalization cannot adequately be addressed by using repressive means and policing Muslim communities, measures which might even aggravate feelings of exclusion and alienation among the Muslim population. In particular, as I told you before, the murder of Dutch filmmaker Theo van Gogh has led European official and social commentator, also in very liberal society like the Northern Europe ones, to calling for greater integration of Muslim and other immigrants into mainstream European society through dialogue. These led, for example, to the Harus experiments in Denmark, experiment of de-radicalization program involving local university and local religious authority and former terrorists to carry out a new advanced de-radicalization program. The belief that Muslim and other must, on the one hand, embrace the native culture of their new European home countries, including the idea of secularism, and on the other hand, be assisted in their integration into European society, is now widely shared among European policymakers. In order to prevent this radicalization, some European governments have started encouraging actively moderate political Muslim voices and promoting a greater role for them by founding, encouraging the creation of national Muslim councils. These efforts are aimed at establishing discussion for, to promote homegrown Islam, in which local Islamic association and in particular the imams are expected to play an important role conveying European values rather than the Islamic radicalization. Often unfamiliar with the fractional milieu of the Islamic association in their countries, these efforts have also been the objective of providing governments with a national Islamic leadership, which could then serve as a partner and a counterpart for dialogue. As I told you, Islam is a plural. So who can speak in name of whom? The need for this, the stems from the fact that the relatively young Muslim faith communities, as distinguished from Christian or Jewish faith community, often lack institutions that could serve as a community interest representative and legitimate partners in dialogue with government institutions. This is the crucial point. In many European countries, Muslim faith communities are only organized in transient network of rival association. Such associations are sometimes still under the influence of the governments of immigrants' countries of origin and cannot agree on forming joint representations. These will be illustrated further only in relation, for example, to Italy, where Muslim Brotherhood is strong, and in Germany, where the Turkish government still plays a very strong influence in order to manage the Muslim Turkish community. But recently, particular efforts in many European countries are being directed at developing a better understanding and a closer grip of imams, Muslim clerics, or Muslim religious authorities who preach in Europe. This has partially been driven by findings according to which extremist Muslim clerics played and play a central role in radicalizing some European Muslim youth. I could quote some example, but we don't have enough time. What is interesting is that these imams have frequently been educated and trained abroad, and are sometimes also paid by foreign institutions like the Diyanet, the Turkish Religious Ministry for Religious Affairs. They are often unfamiliar with the morals and customs of their European host countries, and only stay for a limited time before going back to their countries of origin. And in many cases, these imams remain outsider with a little interest to integrate into and understand the society of their European host countries. Some are even beholden to foreign interests, since the sending authority and state consider these imams as a means of maintaining influence over Muslim immigrant communities in the West, thus guaranteeing the flow of remittance that are still an important contribution to the economies of many countries of origins. Efforts at integration by European states are therefore also sometimes regarded in a critical manner. Instead of integration, some countries' origin would favor minority rights hello? Can you hear me?
It's just me. It's just me in the chat, Massimo. You can keep on. It's just me inviting students.
I'm concluding. Just few minutes. I'm concluding.
You can talk. You can talk how long you want.
No. I don't want to take your time nor to boring you. But what I'm trying to say that so the attempt of influencing and controlling the original community. The hope of many European policy makers is therefore that European homegrown imams will be more independent and will find it easier to reconcile their teachings of Islam with the liberal values of the Western society they live in, and will thus also promote a sort of integration among their communities. This hope is reflected by initiatives like the establishment of an elected French Council of the Muslim faith in 2003, le Conseil de réflexion sur l'Islam en France, by the French government, but also the Spanish since 1992, Acuerdo con la Comunidad Islámica de España, and the British since the 1996, the Belgian since 1998, the Dutch, and the attempt made by the Italian governments to establish such institution. Well, in Italy, we will face some legal obstacles because, as maybe you know, the relationship with other confessions, other religions, other than the Catholic one, should be ruled under a specific agreement called intese, which are, after all, agreement of a constitutional level, and that makes things particularly complex, as Andrea can better explain to you. But beside other very practical problems concerning the Muslim faith community, such as the legal framework for building mosques, cemetery, or Islamic religious education in schools, one of the prime targets of this effort is the training of homegrown imams to minister to the needs of their Muslim community and contain radicalism. So what? Which future for this multicultural Europe with all these challenges I've just mentioned? Well, let me conclude Davide Sassoli's speech. You know, the former Italian president of the European Parliament just passed away 2 months ago. And Davide Sassoli said that we cannot return to the status quo. We cannot return to the world of the past. We need new models that take into account the social and the environmental dimension, a new approach focused on the dignity of all individuals, not citizens, individuals, but also on the protection of the planet, all the planet, as we are about to rebuild our economies and our societies on new foundation. This was the hope. after when the pandemic situation seemed to come to an end. And in view of the colossal investment that Europe will inject into public policies, it's even more crucial and urgent to listen to our fellow citizens, feel their needs, expectation in terms of assistance, jobs, dignity, security, and prosperity, and their vision of this common European future. I believe, he said, it's our responsibility to put citizens at the center of their European project. And the more we advance with integration, with this solidarity between states, the more important it will be for a European citizen to be and feel committed to this project. The commitment must be commensurate with the ambitions we have for Europe. Our democracies also been challenged around the world. I categorically reject this point of view. We must demonstrate again and again that only democracy can protect our individual and collective freedoms, our dignity, the common good, peace, security, social progress, and economic well-being. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you.
Thank you, Massimo. Thank you very much for your inspiring, very inspiring lecture. In these troubled days, it is a fundamental contribution to have such inspiring views on European identity. Thank you so much. I invite again students to start asking their questions. They can use both the chat and they can raise their hands. We will leave them the floor for very short questions in order to leave the floor to as many students as possible. While we will wait for a student's question, I would like to put a first issue. Massimo mentioned these, but the time is very short, so he didn't achieve the point. I would like to ask you something about the neglected integration. This is the way you called it, neglected integration. For sure, it is related to Italian perspective on integration. And we have a huge and important debate in our country related to citizenship of those young people who were born in this country and grew up in this country, participating to our scholar system since their first years of life. However, there are still many difficulties and obstacles to obtain citizenship for them. And I believe that citizenship is the main and avenue to achieve integration. For at least citizenship is the instrument of right to vote, and right to vote plays a role in a well-integrated society. And right to vote implies the trust that communities have toward institutions and toward national and European institutions. So I really would like to know your opinion on this specific topic. And in the while, I hope students will want to intervene with their questions.
Thank you, Andrea. I don't know if I can answer or. No,
please, of course, you can start.
Thank you. Yes, thank you for your question, because these actually touch the essential and the crucial point. Citizenship, after all, is the main relationship tying the individual to the state, granting, of course, duties and obligations, but also rights. And it's that this biunivocal relationship with the state is absolutely essential. As you said, there are some bizarre situations of children who grow up in our societies. So children attending elementary schools and intermediary schools who are no longer, who are not considered citizens of the state. And while their parents, for example, have started the long process to obtain their citizenship, which is really, really bizarre. So my personal position on this point would be not only, in terms of legal, strict answers, but maybe we should go farther, the traditional requirements. I mean, jus soli is simply something which is, jus sanguinis is completely overcome by the history, because, come on, if you share the values, you can be considered a citizen of the state. So according to me, jus sanguinis should be, in a certain sense, reviewed. But also jus soli, in a certain sense, could be misleading. Perhaps it has been discussed, the issue of jus culture. When the child is attending Italian schools and is growing with his, with his friends, sharing the same values, making the same plays, reading the same lectures, structuring his brain and his attitude in the same way of his companions. So why we shouldn't take into consideration this new dimension of citizenship? You can't call jus culture, but at least jus scholae. Something, because school is the very basis, the basic place where people form their consciousness of belonging. And in this sense, it would be very, very interesting, starting from not from the elementary school, but even before, from the, I say in English, scuola materna, the nursery school, because at that moment, people form their psychological way of attitude in how to interact with the other gender, for example, how to respect. They learn respecting rules. They learn the rules of the game since in the very beginning. Now, if you count this nursery school period plus the elementary school and intermediate school, then you don't need to wait for the 18 years old, for being 18 years old. But maybe you can recognize this citizenship even earlier to these people. And these, according to me, will have also a sort of boomerang effect with with their families and their families, because it be like a sort of like a booster, it can be a sort of boost in serving like a promotion, also involving their families, who can have, as I told you, their roots and their feet still in their original country. So seeing their own kids, their own children integrated with this new form of citizenship, it can be also a very good push for themselves to consider themselves. Their future, after all, is their kids and their children. So this new approach maybe can be useful, but this is my personal opinion. Thank you. Hoping to answer to your question.
There is a question by a student in the chat. It's a quite long one, but we can read all together.
Would you mind summarize it?
Yes, it asks. It's Davide Marinali. Do you think that the French method of integration based on the idea of laïcité can be efficient? How would it increase problems of identity, or could it increase problems of identity and integration? Especially this comes out related to the ban on religious symbols in public schools. That's a very interesting lecture for many students here in the Zoom room are currently working on fundamental rights adjudication, and the European Court of Strasbourg, you already mentioned how dealt a lot with these kind of problems. Indeed, I'm curious as well as David to know your take about that, because it seems that sometimes the court follows a true neutralistic approach, an idea that pluralism only can exist in a neutralization of religion. I wonder whether this is the true and right approach to manage such conflicts.
Do you want me to add something? No, I can't hear you. Andrea, I don't know if it's my problem, but I can't.
No, it's my problem, sorry. Yes, the fact is that students ask these questions expecting your answer, although I imagine that answering these questions is very, very challenging for you.
Yeah,
You can find a way to circumvent if you want.
No, but I fully agree with you, and maybe we also touched these very sensitive issue during our lectures with the GG students, also last year, when, for example, analyzing the issue, not only the very abused theme of Islamic veil in public space, but also the criminalization of the conduct of doctors issuing the certificate of virginity, the virginity test. You know that in France, they criminalized doctors who certified the virginity. And then we started a public debate with our students and said, what do you think? In name of laicite, I mean, in names of respect of human rights, this is something which is felt against the dignity of women, against the dignity of a human being. And after all, yes, but after all, you know, should it prevail the interest of the state to protect these women from any interference, including their own parents' interference, also the self-determination in terms of sexual behavior. And so states should somehow protect this self-determination, or should respect cultural/religious belief. And on top of this, why criminalizing the conduct of the doctor? I mean, which are the criminal, from a criminal point of view. And then we came out with different position. And I simply can refer to these different, all legitimate position. There were those who support the idea that, yes, the idea of laicite should prevail anyhow, because people should be free, including girls, to be virgin or not. It's their own choice. So this interference of the state, it was legitimate. It was considered legitimate on one side. Other people said, no, maybe it's more prudent, it's completely legitimate, these opposition by religious groups and religious community, simply because, yes, even though you can't obtain this certificate in France, you can travel abroad and you can submit your daughter to a medical or doctoral visit, and you can obtain the same result. So, you know, it's easier. So, I mean, there were, so, and also these can push also in terms of how to, also the reconstruction of hymenesis, by the way, chirurgical operation. So these kind of norms can facilitate some parallel development of chirurgical market, by the way, and so on. So, you know, it's not only an abstraction, this idea of laicite, of assimilationist approach, but it affects so many practical aspects and so many fundamental rights, which are not only religious in the abstract sense, but as I'm trying to demonstrate, they can touch so many aspects, including sexual orientation, not only, you know, dress code or whatever. But we can talk for an entire day, maybe for an entire seminar. Thank you, David, for your question.
Thank you. Let's see if we have some students who want to intervene. For sure, Professoressa Corrado, Luisa, who is the very engine of our YUFE Alliance.
Thank you, Andrea.
Luisa.
First, let me congratulate with Massimo. We had almost 100 attendees today, which is really an exceptional number of participants.
Thank you.
And really, we really appreciated your clarity, and you did touch many important points on an argument on a topic that is at the core of our societies. Actually, I'm curious about something. You actually stressed that despite the attempts of socially including the Muslim communities, there is still little attention to the political inclusion. So these communities, no one that can speak for them at the institutional level. So I'm wondering, I mean, you mentioned there are almost 2 million Muslims in Italy. So I would think that even the youngest generation of Muslims that can really via social media, so via the informal media outlets, they can actually interact together. So what is really creating an obstacle in this respect? Why they have so many difficulties in creating a political party, for example, that could be, I think, easily representing their instances at the institutional level? So that's my yes.
Yeah. Thank you, Luisa. First of all, the 2 million enough Muslim present here in Italy. I started my conference by stressing the diversity of people, geographical provenience, as well as cultural, and Islam is not uniform. So ethnicities are so different. Moroccans are Moroccan, and as well as Pakistani or Bengali people, which is the new vague of the Islamic wave in Italy. But each one of these ethnic community, even sharing a common religious belief, they are completely different vis-a-vis the the patriarchal ideas of family. For example, Tunisians are one thing, whereas Pakistani people are completely different. And by the way, among some communities we can record some specific culturally oriented crimes, not in any communities, just to give you the example, but also from a strict religious point of view, they are divided into communities. So they are under different influences. They are not together. Nevertheless, the representative parts of these communities are sitting together around the table. They are a sort of counterpart of our government in order to try a sort of list of priorities, just trying to face the needs, the elementary needs, as I told you, building of mosques or halal food in prisons and in hospitals or in public schools, building of cemeteries. I mean, but these are practical issues, The idea of having a political representative is so far because of the ethnic diversity and also, yes, I don't want to refer to these. Have you read this novel Submission in English, Michel Houellebecq? This is a novel, of course, imagining that in France, all Muslims living there, 6 million of Muslims, they gathered together and they found a political party, which is capable to influence the French policy by allying with socialists instead of far right wing, you know, just orienting the national policy in name of the religion. Well, having this kind of religious party will be really, really difficult. Yes, somebody told, yes, in Italy, we experimented parties which were inspired by religious principles, but should be a completely different experiment because of the strict connection in Islam of religious and politics, whereas the Italian experiments were based exactly on the contrary, on the clear separation, despite the religious inspiration, but a clear separation of political institution from religious one, from religion. Then, okay, and this is, after all, the big challenge. If we read some pamphlet write down by religious Islamic leader, for example, the Swiss / English leader Tariq Ramadan, who is a professor at the Cambridge University, by the way, and is considered the leader of young Muslim community in Europe. Well, he writes down in his pamphlet that Muslims are obliged to respect the laws of the state, of the hosting state, and that's it, unless they are contrary to the very basic principle of Islam. And when he writes this in Arabic, it's quite challenging. So to which extent Muslims are obliged to respect the laws of the state? Or, he seems to say, otherwise they have to try to organize themselves and to create a sort of political party in order to counterbalance these anti-Islamic bug. So can you understand what I'm trying to say in a few words? But this should be also the theme of a specific seminar next time.
Thank you so much, Massimo.
Thank you.
Well, we have touched a very interesting point with this last question by Professor Corrado. On my side, I do believe that we have to disseminate as much as possible the right to vote of Muslims, starting with granting citizenship and then promoting democratic participation. But at the same time, it is very true that this could imply a challenge related to religiously oriented political parties, which is for sure problematic for our European model of democracy. At the same time, however, I believe that our democracies are strong enough to afford this kind of challenges at least as far as those groups are within and respect the basic foundations of the democratic process. But for sure, we should agree on what those basic foundations are. It's a true open debate, and we for sure can invite students to deepen those problems. Also, going back to a fundamental book, a seminal work on these problems, which is the dialogue between Jürgen Habermas and Charles Taylor on multiculturalism, the European identity and multiculturalism, is a debate which more or less started with that seminal dialogue. Thank you very much again, Massimo. We have reached the end of our event.
For this opportunity for speaking to so many students from all over Europe. And best wishes to our initiative of YUFE. And thank you so much to Andrea and Luisa, especially for your invitation. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Massimo, for actually giving the talk. And thank you also, Andrea, for organizing and moderating the event. So an exceptional outcome. And I really congratulate again, Massimo, for his presentation. Thank you so much, everyone, and all attendees. Thank you.
Ciao.
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 Bye. Thank you. Bye. Thank you all.
Bye.